What's up, guys? You're watching another episode of Nail That Tone, a series that's all about helping you guys achieve some of the most legendary guitar tones of all time. In this episode, we're talking about Megadeth's Peace Sells guitar tone, specifically about the song Wake Up Dead. This is, of course, a classic of the thrash genre, so there's so many cool stuff to talk about, as always, so let's get right into it. As always with the Nail That Tone series, the first thing we're talking about is finger tone. For finger tone this week, I really wanted to highlight the importance of the spider power chord technique that Dave Mustaine, I'm assuming he maybe didn't invent it, but he was definitely a pioneer of this technique. The spider chord technique is essentially a technique that has you using more than just two fingers to do the power chords when you're switching, because sometimes you're switching between different strings and so forth. So it actually makes it a little bit easier, and you get a little bit more clarity from your power chords when you're switching that quickly instead of kind of hopping around just using two fingers. I've actually shot just a visual video kind of showing an incorrect way of doing it, and the more Dave Mustaine approach, which of course uses that spider chord technique to play the different power chords. So let's take a look at that video real quick. Now we're talking about the gear that was used on this particular record. Now the good thing about this particular record is that there is actually some good information on the inner sleeve of some of the records for this particular record. Now we do see some information printed on the actual kind of inner sleeves of some of them, and we see that for Dave Mustaine at least, it shows BC Rich guitar and Marshall head. So it's not too specific with the exact models and all that kind of stuff, but it does give us a general idea of what was used or what was likely used. It does also state some kind of obscure, I guess, brand of guitar cabinets. I'm not sure if this is exactly what was used for the record, because oftentimes different bands were sponsored by different brands, and sometimes they would use other things that were available in the recording studios and not exactly what it says they were sponsored by or whatever. So again, it's kind of a little bit obscure, but we see that it does state that they were Celestion speakers, and kind of the classic combo of a Marshall head with some Celestion speakers. Again, it's not too specific with what type of Marshall head. It does just state that it was 150 watt, so that could have been various different models that were out at the time. But I think using any Marshall branded kind of head with that kind of British voicing will get you something very similar to what was likely used on this particular record. So now we're talking about the gear that I used to get the tone that you guys heard in the beginning of the video. Now my setup was pretty simple. For guitars, I used my Jackson King V. This is a lower end Jackson King V, so it doesn't have anything special going on with it, no special pickups or anything like that. And when it comes to the guitar head, I use my Marshall Studio Classic 800, which kind of just has that classic British sound and kind of the sound of that 80s kind of guitar sound. So that's kind of why I decided to go with that particular amplifier. Now when it comes to guitar cabinets, I use my vintage 70s Marshall cabinet because it's got the classic greenbacks, and that's kind of a little bit of the sound that I hear personally on that record. So I decided to go with a classic Marshall sound. That's why I use that particular cabinet and speaker combination. So when it comes to recreating the sound of this record, I would say that one of the most important things is probably getting the reverb to sound right. The reverb we hear on the record, to me, definitely has a vintage vibe to it, and it's pretty thick in the mix. So I use quite a bit of reverb in the overall mix, and I would definitely recommend trying to find a reverb that has a little bit of that vintage vibe that we hear on this record. So now we're talking about what other gear you could use to get a similar sound. Now the good thing when we're talking about a Marshall type of sound is that there's a lot of clones and different kind of just amplifiers that try to mimic that sound. So since we're talking about the early era of Megadeth, it's pretty obvious to me that it just kind of screams Marshall and that early kind of classic British voicing. So I would recommend using any kind of amplifier that sort of has that sound. So you could of course go with a budget Marshall option or some of the other kind of cheaper options, other clones that are similar to Marshalls. When it comes to guitars, I would just recommend using any guitar with humbuckers. That is the sound that we hear on this record, is a humbucker, just distorted guitar. We don't hear any kind of single coil stuff, especially if we're just really talking about the rhythm guitar of this particular album. And when it comes to guitar cabinets, I just recommend using any guitar cabinet that you think sounds good and has some good quality speakers that you like. I think that matters a lot more when we're talking about guitar tones and what specific speakers, because for one, we don't even know what was used on the record, and different speakers can sound different and so forth. So I would recommend on just trying to focus on capturing the best sound from the speaker and cab combination that you currently have. Anyway guys, that's pretty much it for this video. If you liked the video, go ahead and leave a like, comment, and consider subscribing. If you like these type of videos, we try to release these videos on a weekly basis, so hopefully guys, we will see you guys in the next video.